thanks for coming on today, man. I really do appreciate you reaching out to me, and I also appreciate you bringing up, you having some kind of issues with what Carlos and Larry said on my Decriminalization Nature podcast. So definitely want you to dive into that because I'm very curious about it. Like I said, I don't really know too much about the facts of what's going on in Oakland, and hopefully you can fill me in on that.
Well, I'm living it, so I definitely I can tell you a few things, but I guess let me start by giving you my background a little bit. So right now I run the Entheogenic Plant Church in Oakland, and we provide cannabis and mushrooms for our members. But before that, I was in the cannabis industry, and I've done a lot of things. I started the first cannabis club in a large city out here. Battled with the city, negotiated with the city, worked on legislation for statewide legalization that unfortunately didn't go through because of Prop 64. And though that language actually lived on as the base for Decrim California's statewide legalization for mushrooms. So I've done a lot of things. I talk from an area of experiencing the law versus theories, which are really what kind of Carlos and Larry are talking about. Probably, there was a few things that really were a little frustrating with what they talked about. Probably the biggest one being that it was okay to take a pound of mushrooms and show that to a police officer here in Oakland or in any of the other state or cities that have passed similar laws. And that's a very dangerous statement. The fact is, the laws that Decriminalize Nature has been passing are what's called lowest priority. And, there's a few different types of legalization-ish things, and we can get into that in a bit, but what's really important to understand about lowest priority is it doesn't actually decriminalize anything. It doesn't actually change any criminal penalties that one might experience from the war on drugs. So here in Oakland, if you walk up to a police officer with a pound of mushrooms, you have now taken the lowest priority to the highest priority, because here you are holding a Schedule I narcotic that's illegal in the state of California, and that can get you some big problems.
I think he did say an ounce and not a pound, but that really doesn't even matter, does it?
Yeah, it doesn't really matter. There is no limit. So really an eighth of mushrooms would be the same. Although here in Oakland, the cops have better things to do in general. So, if they just saw an eighth of mushrooms, they're probably not going to deal with it. But an ounce is enough for somebody to make a claim that you're selling mushrooms. And that's really where the danger gets into, an ounce or a pound. Either way, that's enough in the eyes of a police officer to be able to say, hey, well, this isn't for personal use, this is for selling it, and that's a different crime than it would be just for possession.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's what Carlos was, the message he was trying to get across, I'm pretty sure, but he just, if you take that statement at face value, it could get you into some kind of trouble.
Yeah, that's again, it's understanding the type of law that they're passing. And lowest priority is definitely, it's an important first step, and it's definitely got its uses, but you really got to understand what the difference is between lowest priority, decriminalization, and legalization. And of course, there's a wide spectrum between those things. But lowest priority is something that can be done through a city council. The other two can't. So, when it comes down to what a city can do, passing lowest priority is, there's no big consequences to the city. They're not changing any laws. They're not saying, hey, now our law conflicts with state law, which would be the problem if a city council decided, oh, well, we're going to say that no one will receive criminal penalties in the city of Oakland. Well, understanding how the laws and the court works, that really wouldn't work. The people that, so, you know, because I've been through a bunch of court cases and I kind of know how the system works, the way things work is the district attorney for the county is who's going to charge you. So if the city of Oakland said, well, it's no longer a criminal act to do anything with mushrooms, the people who would actually be enforcing the law on you would be the district attorney. So, you know, there's different ways that maybe you could say the Oakland police can't do anything, but that doesn't affect the sheriff, that doesn't affect the state, and that doesn't affect the district attorney, which is who's going to actually charge you. So on a process level, to expand the dialogue and at least change the priorities for the police officers in some way, lowest priority is a really important thing. But true decriminalization means that you're removing criminal penalties. And a city doesn't have criminal penalties for drugs, that those are actually state charges. So there's no way for the city to remove criminal penalties when they don't have them in the first place.
That makes a lot of sense. So what is lowest priority actually accomplish? It's just like set certain parameters for the law enforcement, and it doesn't really change any kind of laws.
Yeah, exactly.
Laws?
I mean, it does some important things. Probably the biggest one is spreading the dialogue, right? So when a city passes a lowest priority law, now there's a dialogue that starts going around about these things. So, you know, there's a huge public awareness and political messaging that are really important with what you can do with lowest priority. But as far as actually changing the law, those are done at a state level.
I see. So all of these cities that have quote unquote decriminalized, have they actually decriminalized, or they just went to a lowest priority?
They are all lowest priority.
Oh, I see. See, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the really frustrating things about the dialogue going around, because, you know, people hear decriminalize nature and they're thinking, oh, well, now mushrooms are decriminalized, and that means I can drive around with a pound of mushrooms in my car and not have a problem. That's not the case, unfortunately. You know, it's better than nothing, right? I mean, if your choice is no statement from the local officials saying anything, or at least a law that says it should be their lowest priority. But the problem with that is who determines priorities. And when you look at what happened to our church, so to give you a little more background, here in Oakland, we actually have a lowest priority law for cannabis. And that was started, that was a voter initiative for the city of Oakland that was done in 2004. So since 2004, the statement of it shall be the lowest priority for law enforcement to deal with anything related to cannabis has been law, and voter law, which is a little more important, but not significant in this case. Now, ever since that passed, there's been what's called Measure Z clubs in Oakland, who were doing recreational cannabis sales before legalization passed. And even to this day, there's still a dozen Measure Z clubs here in Oakland. Now, the problem with lowest priority is when you look at the history there have been raids on these Measure Z clubs ever since the law passed. The thing is, they just aren't reported. And what the cops do, I mean, it's a small group led by one person here in Oakland. They go down, they kick in the door, they take all the cannabis, they go after all the cash, and 9 times out of 10, if not 10 times out of 10, the club that was raided then closes its doors and moves to another location, or just disappears. So there isn't any media coverage of this. It's just basically a legal robbery by the cops.
Yeah.
and at a certain point, they're allowed to keep the money that they take too. So, you know, it's really, if you understand the history of the language of lowest priority, again, it's better than nothing, but it doesn't actually stop the police from doing these things, because in their mind, you know, a priority is whatever they decide it be that day.
Mm-hmm.
And when when our church got raided, I actually brought that up to the sergeant that was raiding us, and, you know, I'll get into how everything went down in a second, but his response to, look, both of the things that we provide are lowest priority for law enforcement. He said, well, if I were to prioritize everything that I do, I'd never get anything done. And, you know, that doesn't really mean anything to me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the attitude from the police of, you know, look, lowest priority doesn't really mean anything. Legally, it doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah.
So they can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
It is better than nothing, but it is not, it is definitely not decriminalization. And it's the lack of understanding of what it is can really lead people to some major legal problems. Because
Yeah.
again, if you think that it's legal or decriminalized in Oakland to drive around with a pound of mushrooms in your car, when you get pulled over, you'll find out, oh, wait, I'm still getting charged with criminal penalties for this.
Mm-hmm.
So,
You know that full well, right?
yeah. I mean, well, they haven't actually charged anything in our case with the church, but the reason that we are a church, you know, one, that we truly believe in the spiritual and religious use of both cannabis and mushrooms and really all other plants. But beyond that, the law is such that from a federal level, churches are actually allowed to provide these sacraments to their members.
Mm-hmm.
And that comes out of a Supreme Court case called the UDV case. That was an ayahuasca church. Now they actually got into legal problems because they were importing ayahuasca from outside the country, and customs caught them. So in that case, it's a beautiful case. Basically, they say, look, if this is a real religious use, the Controlled Substances Act doesn't apply to the church. And the UDV case took about 7 years and cost something around like $4 or $5 million. It was very expensive. But they won the case, and that kind of set the ground for what we do and what other plant-based churches can do federally. So with the structure here in Oakland, the thought was, well, look, it's lowest priority for cannabis, it's lowest priority for all plants. If there is a place that would be a good place to open a church like what we're doing, Oakland would be the best place. And it still is the best place, but it's then you get into the rate.
Yeah.
So in case somebody's watching this and doesn't know what happened, August 13th, our church was raided by a group of about 20 Oakland PD officers. Now, this really kind of surprised us because we were expecting at some point to have some sort of raid happen, but we were expecting it to be county, state, or federal. The last thing we were expecting was for the OPD, who both of the things that we're dealing with are lowest priority, for them to decide that it was a high priority to go after us. But once you understand the group that's doing this, it makes a lot of sense because, again, they don't look at the law of lowest priority meaning anything. They look at, here's some drug dealers that we can easily go kick down their doors and take all their money.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, it's really bad. And, you know, it's what happened to us was really horrible, but we will be suing the OPD. And the big difference between the case that we're doing versus the UDV case. The UDV case was actually them suing customs. So what we'll be doing is we'll be suing a local PD on a federal level. And if and when we win this case, that will really set nice federal case law to say, hey, local PD and really any level of PD, law enforcement, you should not be going after a church like this.
So yeah, that could set the precedent for a lot of things. And are you basing this future case on the UDV case? Is that kind of where your leverage is coming from?
Yeah, I mean, the UDV case is the most significant one because it actually went to Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, and they won. So that's a really solid case. And again, the Supreme Court ruled in their favor. The other case that's really important to understand relative to what we do is a case called the Myers case. And the Myers case was actually a marijuana church that was attempting to do this, I think back in the late 70s. Now they actually lost their case, but it's really important to understand why they lost their case. So if you go back and read the Myers case, it's actually kind of almost a template to be able to understand what you need to fit into to be able to legally justify that you're a church. And in the Myers case, the biggest problem was the guy was saying, look, we believe it's our religious right to grow and sell as much pot as we want. And this is all, healing and medical. And what was missing was spiritual or religious. So, if you go back and read the Myers case, it's really nice because the way they laid it out, it's you hit these 5 points and then you can be a church. But the way they lay it out is saying, look, Myers didn't do this, he didn't do that, he didn't do this, he didn't do that. So looking at that case to really understand, okay, well, that means we need to make sure that we can talk about how we're covering this, that, at all the 5 points is really important. But, for me, this really is a spiritual tool. So covering those points is really easy to do.
I think what the problem is when you say these things are spiritual tools to people who have never done these things, they'll look at you like you have 5 heads. Like they don't understand that this is actually, it actually literally is a spiritual tool to tap into another world or just more into your mind, like whatever you want to call it. Like it actually is. But like, how do you convince somebody that's never been in those mindsets or states of mind that it is?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so what we follow at the church is what I like to call the religious evolution theory, which is basically the stoned ape theory with a better sounding name. The stoned ape theory really, just the fact that people are calling it stoned ape, immediately they don't take it as serious.
Yeah.
But if you really go back and look at what people have done to support the stoned ape theory and just logically think about it, when our ancient ancestors definitely would have come across these mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're a hungry monkey and you see a patch of tasty looking mushrooms, what are you going to do? Probably try one. And it turns out that they're pretty tasty. So actually you'll probably end up filling your belly with them, which gets into the really high dose work, which is what I personally do. So on a regular basis, I'll take between 15 to about 30 grams of mushrooms in a single dose.
That's intense. Over the span of how many hours? Like you just down it?
I just down it. I make tea out of it, and I post some of my tea making and the other people that I'm sitting for with really high doses. I post images on my Instagram of the tea that we're making and what we're doing.
Wow.
But yeah, we just down it as quick as possible in one dose. And at that level, yeah, Yeah, it's very intense. I mean, it's definitely not for everybody, and it's one of those things that you really need to work your way up into. You don't just, you've never taken mushrooms before and decide to take 10 grams of mushrooms. That's not going to work out very well for you.
Yeah, don't do that. Anyone that's
Don't do
listening, do not do that.
Don't do that. And if anybody wants more information, we put it on our website, which is zidedoor.com. That's like side, but with a Z. So ZIDE door.com. We've got a couple different guides up there for both the regular use of mushrooms and the high dose use of mushrooms. But at these really high levels, you meet entities. You meet things that provide you knowledge that you wouldn't otherwise have. And you know, that's really where the stoned ape theory becomes not really a theory, but factually what must have happened. Because you eat these mushrooms and then some creature appears and it starts talking to you. You don't even know language and it's able to communicate to you.
Yeah.
To me, that is where religion itself came from.
Yeah, I agree.
So, you know, as far as like trying to convince somebody, for us legally, we don't really need to convince anybody. We just need to prove that we really believe in it. But as far as people who doubt that the mushroom specifically is a tool for religion, they just really need to do some research and realize that, hey, it's not only the tool for religion, it is why we have this concept that there's something on the other side. You know, why we have the ability to talk about things like abstract art and concepts of God. Without a doubt, you know, there was language that the monkeys would have had. They would have been able to point at things. They, you know, we can see this today with monkeys that exist in this time period, that they do have ways to communicate. But how do you take the leap forward from pointing and grunting to talking about concepts of God, talking about concepts of art? And it makes a lot of sense that once you've seen these things and these teachers come to tell you these things, that's where humans would have evolved to be able to do this.
Yeah, it's like the missing link. It really is. What things do you, so when you're on these high doses, which I can't even imagine, because the most I've done is like 4 to 5 grams, and I'm like, this is intense. So when you're under 10, 15 grams of psilocybin, what do you get from it? Like, what revelations? What do these entities really say to you?
Well, I mean, what I should probably just do is tell you how I ended up taking 30 grams of mushrooms. Right. But first, you know, I actually don't do less than 15. Though I tell people if they want to get to these levels that they need to start small and work their way up. For me, it was pretty intense and pretty quick. And I never imagined I would be somebody that did 30 grams of mushrooms or even talked about doing high dose mushrooms. That wasn't a goal. That wasn't a thought. And in fact, when I first did my heroic dose, the 5 grams, I didn't realize that there was anything past that. So I take 5 grams of mushrooms in my bedroom, silent darkness. You know, I don't really like to go into what happens on the journey for this first initial story, but I'll tell you more about what you see after I get through this. So the first time I did 5 grams, it was pretty intense. I saw some interesting things. At that point, I hadn't met any entities. But after the trip, I came out in a loop saying, you need to learn how to breathe and you need to do more mushrooms. You need to learn how to breathe. You need to do more mushrooms. Just repeating that. I must have repeated that maybe 200 times.
Wow. So
when I sobered up, I was like, well, I'm breathing right now. I don't know what you're talking about, mushrooms, but knowing that the lethal dose is somewhere around 4 pounds, I was like, okay, well, I guess I got to do more mushrooms. So,
so you did more mushrooms.
yeah, a few weeks later, letting my tolerance clear out, because that's a really important part of what I'm doing. This is not building tolerance. This is more learning how to use these things properly. I did 10 grams. Another really interesting experience. Again, I didn't really see anything. I kind of saw like hints of things that could be coming through into this reality, but I came out of the trip repeating the same phrase over and over. You need to learn how to breathe, and you need to do more mushrooms. You need to learn how to breathe, and you need to do more mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
So this time I was like, okay, well, let me Google how to breathe. And if you Google how to breathe, you'll find a TED Talk, and you'll find multiple doctors who have posted videos about how, as a society, we've forgotten how to breathe. And long and short of it is, because we've been sucking in our bellies, we've stopped breathing with our diaphragms. And now there's a new disease that's happening where elderly who haven't been using their diaphragms, their muscle has atrophied, and no longer, they're now having breathing problems simply because they've been breathing wrong.
Oh.
And I was one of those people. And you know, that's where things got really weird for me, is because how did I know I didn't know how to breathe? And it's because clearly after the first trip, I was like, fuck you, mushrooms, I'm breathing right now. I don't know what you're talking about. But clearly I didn't know how to breathe.
Yeah.
So for me, there's only two possibilities, and both are pretty amazing. One is that the mushrooms allowed me to connect with something inside myself that was allowed me to communicate clearly that this was something that I was physically doing wrong. And if that's what happened, that's pretty amazing. The other possibility, which after all my high dose work is really where I feel it came from, is that there are guides and entities on the other side. And the ones that were leading me through this knew that that was the first lesson that I needed to learn before going further. So I learned how to breathe. And a few weeks later, I did 15 grams of mushrooms. Now, this was where I actually started seeing entities on the other side. They would come through into this reality, and I had conversations with them.
Was it more like psychic conversations? It wasn't like literally speaking English, right?
No, it was like speaking English with somebody standing right in front of you.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And that's really where the high dose work begins, is about 15 grams. But it's important that you work your way up there. But as an ancient monkey, you would just be a hungry monkey eating a bunch of mushrooms. And once you filled your belly with them, you would start having some of these experiences that I've been experiencing, and other people who have been doing high dose mushrooms have experienced. But this time I came out repeating, there's more knowledge to spread, and you got to do more mushrooms. Right. So at this point, I'm a little freaked out because, again, to my knowledge, 5 grams was the most people ever did. So here I had just done 15 grams, and I'm getting guidance to do more. So I start Googling, and I find Kalindi E, who's now since passed away. Really, really unfortunate, big loss. Really big loss to humanity and for his knowledge. He had been doing these high dose experiences for over 40 years. And his level was 30 to 50 that he regularly worked with.
That man is a legend.
He's beyond a legend. He's probably somebody that had the best understanding of what this reality is that I've ever met. But anyway, it turned out he was talking at a conference in Portland the next weekend. And I had the ability to fly up there and go to the conference. So I walk in the door, the registration desk is to my right, and standing right in front of me is Kalindi. He says hi to me and thinks he recognizes me. right? So
Did you recognize him?
well, I recognized him because he was the reason I was there, right?
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, how many times do you walk in the door and the person that you went to the conference for is literally the first person to say anything to you
Yeah.
and standing right in front of you when you walk in the door?
How did he know you?
Um, that's a good question. He just thought he recognized me.
That's strange.
You know, that's unfortunately something I never really dug into with him. We did I'll just fast forward a little bit. We did a talk about high dose mushrooms here in Oakland a couple months before he passed away. And, you know, the thought at that point is we were going to have a lot of time together going around talking about these things to fill in some of the questions that I have. Like that one is, hey, why did you think you recognized me? But regardless, the conference was exactly what I needed to be at. It was all about plant medicines and religion. And it really could have been designed specifically for me, you know, given that I'm running an entheogenic plant church.
Yeah.
So great conference. I come back. My next dose is a little over 20 grams. And this one is again pretty amazing. I'm now, not only am I at points of this one meeting and talking to entities, but this is where some of the visions really start. And where I say visions, these are really things that could only be described as spiritual visions, but it's more of an experience than a vision, because a vision would be like something you watch on TV. Where these are things where you can, in some cases, touch and feel some of these things happening.
Wow.
That one I came out, this one was, the journey has just begun, and do more mushrooms.
Now, how long ago was this?
This was about a year ago that I started this high dose work.
Okay.
So my last dose, of this little journey to understand the high dose mushrooms was 30 grams, and that one was incredibly intense. That one was actually the first time that I had a sitter with me. The rest of these I had just done by myself in my house alone. But that one, another really intense experience. The entities were there. At one point, I'm holding hands with my sitter, and we're in a circle of these entities. And if you watch the video that I have of it, it looks like she's holding one of their hands too, and we're holding hands in a circle.
Was she on anything, or she was sober?
No, she was totally sober.
Wow.
And there was a couple really interesting things that happened in that one. One of them is, I believe the spirit of ayahuasca actually came in, and it represented itself as a large yellow snake that wrapped itself around my sitter. And the message there was that she needs to come see me.
Oh.
Which, when I told her about later, she really resonated with, because it's something that she had been feeling for a while. So out of that trip, when I finally come down, the message is, everything will be okay. Now,
wow.
Fortunately, not the second part of do more mushrooms. So I was finally like, okay.
That was it. 30's the cap.
You know, well, another really interesting thing, I was really kind of focused on Trump at the time too. So that message for me was actually that this situation with Trump would be okay. And this was before the Ukraine scandal even had happened. And, you know, Trump was looking completely untouchable at that point. Not that he doesn't still look pretty untouchable for a lot of the crazy things that he did, but at that point, he basically, nobody had ever called him on anything.
Yeah.
And, you know, I really hope that message is true, and that everything will be okay under the possibility of Trump for another 4 years. But
we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Needless to say, you know, I had no idea I was going to end up taking 30 grams of mushrooms. This was pure guidance from the mushrooms and from the guides on the other side that knew that this was the path that I needed to be on. Really, 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 really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand and get what you mean with the entities, but like I said, if you said that to like any regular person, any lay person that has no experience, they're gonna be like, "What? Like, what do you mean? You're just like you like they're just gonna look at you crazy."
Yeah.
But it makes sense, man. Like these are like these things are like tools to just communicate with the other side. They're just something here. It seems to be. Do you think these entities communicate with us without these substances, like without us even knowing, and then these allow us to open up our perception to these things? Or in order for these things to even communicate with us as well, we need to take these substances?
There are definitely many ways of reaching these realms. You know, people have been doing it through meditation for thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of years. You know, there's holotropic breathing. You know, I don't really feel that the psychedelic use or the mushroom use is the only way to reach and communicate with the other side.
Yeah.
But I think it's the original way. And I think it's also
The quickest.
yeah, the the most direct.
Yeah.
You know, there's definitely guidance that I get outside of these journeys that I know is part of what I'm going through on this larger process. But for the average person, without dedicating a lot of time to really intense meditation, really the mushrooms are the doorway that opens up the access.
Yeah, and that's why I think they're a tool. They're nature's tool to communicate with the guy in mind.
Well, I would say even beyond that. I mean, they're the tool to help us understand the true nature of reality and what exists on the other side. Because it's, you know, in some of the experiences that I've had, I've met dozens of different entities. And, you know, when you listen to Kalindi talk, he talks about basically exploring an entire other universe that's on this other side. So it's not as simple as just the collective consciousness, although that is a place you can go and visit. It's, you know, communicating with the ancestors. It's communicating with deities that or gods that humanity has been dealing with for, again, hundreds of thousands of years.
Yeah, forever. I mean, since our conception. Like these things have probably been with us. Now, are these entities ever threatening, or are they welcoming?
You know, they can definitely be very difficult, and they can definitely be very terrifying. That isn't always the case. I've met ones that are very welcoming, who are just happy that I'm finally on the other side, and then I can finally see them and they can finally communicate with me. And then, you know, my last high dose, which was about 20 grams, about a month ago, it was one of my most terrifying. At one point, there was a demon materializing through my floor. I look at it and say, "Am I supposed to fight you?" It looks at me and grabs me and pulls me into another dimension where I'm watching a being that defines itself as Satan build its own reality.
Wow.
So,
that's crazy, dude.
Yeah. And the message that I got out of that one, it's, you know, I always get some sort of clear message when I come out of these high doses. The message from that one was that Satan was the first being to design itself. Now, what exactly that means, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it and really try to understand why I was shown that. I know there was a reason I was shown that, and I trust in the messaging that I'm getting. But what does that mean? You know, again, the first ones in my journey were learn how to breathe, and that was really easy to figure out, and that was really obvious. A Google search told me that one.
Yeah.
But you know that's when it gets into the use of cannabis for spiritual purposes, and really the way I describe cannabis and the main spiritual use of cannabis is activating the inner eye. Now, where I first heard this was from somebody who actually told me that they didn't like consuming cannabis, that every time they smoked, it was like there was a giant inner eye that would turn on them and tell them everything that was wrong with their life. And they felt it was really unpleasant. For me, that is the spiritual use of cannabis. It's learning how to use that inner eye to examine what's going on in your life, what's going on around you. And in the case of what I'm doing is to try to understand what I just saw. And again, some of the messages are a lot clearer than others. And this last one, I have to admit, I still don't really understand exactly what that means. But there is kind of a bigger story that all of my journeys have been leading to, which is really that this concept that we have of Christianity and a God that will judge you after you die and those sort of things are really kind of off base, and that there's a lot more to this reality than we currently understand.
Is this what you preach? Like, what are your preachings? Like, what are your sermons like?
Well, we haven't been doing sermons since COVID started. But yeah, the sermons are kind of a combination of historical uses for these things, religious historical usage, safety guidelines. So people, you know, because there's definitely, if you're going to do these high dose amounts, there's definitely some things you need to be aware of as far as safety. But even if you're doing a small amount of mushrooms, it's still, if you know what to expect, you're going to have a much better experience than if you go into it blind. And then, of course, my personal journeys. You know, for a little while, I was doing basically every other week, I would take a high dose, and it really helped me with the sermons. But you know, it can be really intense, and it's you got to have the right space and time to do it. You know, it's you need at least 24 hours after you take the high dose before you're really ready to work again. So it's, you got to be able to fit it into your schedule on top of being mentally prepared for it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the sermons are just kind of, again, a mix of information between historical, safety, and what I've been experiencing on these really high doses.
Yeah, man, that's do you feel like you've been, I know it sounds egotistical in a way, but do you feel like you've been chosen for this role to be the guy that just goes into this world, communicates, and then takes the messages from, you know, from wherever and comes back into this world and preaches the good word?
Well, you know, it's really the best answer to that is really, I feel like my whole path in life has been leading to this point. You know, before I tried mushrooms for the first time, I was actually pretty lost. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. I had spent the majority of my, well, the majority of the 10 years prior in the cannabis industry, and kind of watched everything be destroyed with the legalization that happened here in California, Prop 64. So I was really, really kind of lost and really kind of depressed about this beautiful thing that we had in California, which was the medical market prior to legalization being destroyed by the law that passed. And I didn't really know what to do. So the mushrooms kind of showed me, hey, this is what you got to do. You know, you all your experience in fighting with the government and dealing with court cases and writing laws and, you know, everything that you've been doing up until this point has been for you to be where you are right now. Which is, you know, it's been really comforting. I don't really like to say that I was chosen. I mean, because I don't necessarily feel like there was somebody who, you know, just picked me out of the lineup and said, hey, it's you. But I can definitely see how my entire life has been leading me to this current existence.
Yeah, I don't know if chosen is the right word. It's not like someone was like, yes, Dave. It's
Yeah.
more like your neurochemistry was built the best for this role. It's like, you know, it's just like if you believe in like predetermination, it just seems like, you know, this is how it's supposed to go. Like you in this incarnation are supposed to fill the role and be the guy, because not everybody takes these 15, 20, 30 gram doses. Like you're a rare breed, man. Like I don't,
Yeah.
I mean, unless you know people that I don't, but like that's something special. Like, you know, there's a lot of people that are taking mushrooms right now and maybe in microdoses or just something under 5 grams, but people that take like the amounts that you take, that's something special, man. And I'm not just saying that because that's just like, you are like this, if you can handle that and stay mentally sound, you seem very mentally sound to me. And if you can handle that there's something special to that, I believe. I mean, it's like, I guess you can say it's almost like a blessing to be able to be in that role, man. Like, I'm almost envious because like, I can't, like, to me, I think of that, like that amount. And I'm just like, at this point, I'm just like intimidated. I'm just like, damn, that's just insane to me. But yeah,
Well,
kudos to you, man.
I mean, so there is other people in this world who have been doing this. You know, I
can
get,
imagine. Yeah.
you know, because I post all the journeys that I'm doing on Instagram, I get, you know, I'd say at least once a month, if not more than that, somebody reaching out who's either had one of these experiences or really feels drawn to these experiences. You know, for what I say is, you shouldn't do this work unless you feel drawn to it. But if you feel drawn to it, knowing how to proceed forward is very important. And you know, the thing that Kalindi used to say, and I completely agree with, is if the only thing that's stopping you is fear, you got to get over it and just go back. Because again, after seeing Satan create his own existence and getting dragged there by a demon, I could see how somebody would never want to do these things again. For me, that was a terrifying experience, but it was part of the lesson that I need to understand. I really hesitate to say that anybody can do this, but I think that part of the thing that's going on is this isn't really talked about, and it isn't really things that people have put a lot, other than Kalindi. There's very few people that have really tried to explore this other side and try to understand what's happening over there.
Yeah.
So it's, to me, something that's really important, that more people do. You know, it's really like we have blinders on, and you know, there's this doctrine that is going around about religion and all these different religions that are really just people talking to you. What the mushrooms allow you to do is actually really experience the other side with these high doses. And to me, that's something that's, you know, in the next evolution of humanity, this is something we really need to understand. You know, this isn't just, you know, people having weird trips and going crazy. I didn't know how to breathe.
Yeah.
I was told I need to learn this. and not by myself, you know. So there's real knowledge that exists over there, and you know, when you look, yeah, I definitely encourage people to look up Kalindi Ease, and it's IYI is his last name. He has a lot of talks on YouTube that are out there, and he really talks about how our ancestors would use this technology to go visit their ancestors, and how at a certain dosage you can step into some of these drawings that you see in the temples, and actually experience the realm that was created with these.
Wow, that's profound.
Yeah, it's amazing. And things like the microverse, you know, he talked about, you know, if you've seen the Ant-Man movie, he talked about how that is actually an experience. You know, you can actually go into a microverse. I've experienced that myself in some of my trips. So there is, you know, we have barely scratched the surface of what exists on this other side. And unfortunately, the person who had been doing the most digging for the longest passed away from COVID, which, yeah, horrible, deep loss for all humanity as far as I'm concerned. But as far as where I really feel that we need to go as a race, you know, is getting back to really understanding what these tools can be used for and what exists on the other side. Because they can be used for many different things. I'm not saying that the only way people should ever do mushrooms is by taking 15 grams. You know, the microdose is having really profound benefits for people. The smaller amounts, you know, there's people that are not having cluster headaches because they a couple times a year take a few grams of mushrooms. There's all the studies around depression where, you know, after you come out of just a normal uses of mushrooms, 2 grams to an eighth, people are not depressed for months afterwards. So it's, you know, there's a lot of different ways these tools can be used. But the high dose is a whole level that we haven't even really scratched the surface of.
Yeah, that's what's peculiar to me is there's so many medical benefits, like, you know, like actual hard benefits, like when it comes to like either cannabis or mushrooms, and, you know, stuff that you can write down on paper, just elevated mood or just pain relief, whatever it is. And then when you get into the high doses of these things, they turn into like this spiritual animal. And it's just such a peculiar thing to me. And I definitely agree, man. They have to be integrated into our society, because there's so, in our world right now is this big. Like our point of view, our perspective on life is this big, when in reality there's this much going on. There's just so much going on that we're not tapping into. Our consciousness level is just so, it's just so tight. Like nobody knows what's really, like nobody really knows what it means to be a human being. Like we're all just here existing, going to work, got to pay the bills, going in traffic and doing whatever we have to do to survive. But if people knew the truth and really experienced what it feels like to be this divine creation of a human being, and communicate with our ancestors or whatever these entities are, it gives you more, I guess, just solace in this existence. It gives you more, just, you know, like your 30-gram trip, it's going to be okay. When you know that, like this temporary existence, because we're all going to die, you know, I guess you could say unfortunately, however your viewpoint is, but we're all going to die and it's all temporary. But if you go through these experiences, which everybody should, if everybody just realized it's going to be okay to some kind of extent, like it would create a world where everybody's just so, I mean, right now we're just at each other's throats because there's just so much fear, but we'd have so much less fear of each other and of this world. It's a next step in our evolution.
Absolutely. And I think there's another really important part of that you can have the experience through the mushrooms of we are all one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there is no difference between me and you. And it doesn't matter what your religious belief is. It doesn't matter what your color is. It doesn't matter what economics you grew up in. We are all the same. And if everybody were to really, truly be able to accept that and live that, the world would be a better place.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's so, you know, one of the most spiritual journeys that I've had, and something that I believe that I'll eventually be able to take other people on fairly directly, is one that I was pulled through heaven, I was pulled through hell, I was pulled through every dimension that existed, and ended up in a place of pure light. And I didn't exist, nothing else existed. Everything was just this consciousness. And to me, that was God. And the message that I got out of this journey was one of the deepest that I've gotten so far, which is, if you were God, what would you ask yourself? And where it gets really deep is I was given some answers. So if you were God, the knower of everything, the creator of everything, what could you ask yourself? The only thing that you might not know is, what am I? So this is where I experienced the Big Bang, the creation of life, the start of time and all existence. The answer to God's question, what am I, is us. And, you know, this is really something that's fundamental on pretty much every religion. But it's, if you can actually have that experience and get that knowledge yourself, it really does change you. And if we can all really truly live that, there's no difference between the neo-Nazi and the worst gangster black person that they're worried about, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no difference. We are all God trying to understand what it is.
That's amazing, man. And that's the truth. You know, that is, in my definition of this is a new age term, but like, I'm just gonna say it anyway. In the spiritual awakening, it's coming to that realization that we are all this one consciousness experiencing itself subjectively.
Yeah, well, and I think that, you know, again, if we could get the whole human race onto that, then there becomes another goal for us, which is to help God understand what it is. Right? I mean, if that was the motivation of our entire race, I can't even imagine the levels of technology that we would reach just trying to get there. The amount of enlightenment that would happen, the amount of healing that would happen, if that was actually the goal of our entire race. And to me, that's what it should be. So, you know, these separations of religion, the separations of class, everything that we deal with in our day-to-day existence is kind of meaningless on that level. It isn't at the same time, because for God to understand what it is, it needs to have all these experiences. It needs to have good. It needs to have bad. It needs to have everything of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But for us to really go to the next level as a species, that really is what needs to happen. We need to get past ourselves and start trying to understand what is past ourselves.
It's unity. It's just love. It's this universal connection that we have yet to unveil about ourselves.
Yeah.
Because not everybody knows that. Like, you know, there are select people that know that we are all the same consciousness, which is Brahman in yoga, but like, not everybody knows that. Like, we live in a world of just facade. We live in this fake world in a way where it's just I don't know. It's just so many people are lost right now with just not knowing the truth. And that is the truth. What we just described is the truth. It's the quote unquote truth, is that there is literally no separation between you and I or anybody else in this world. We are all this one band of consciousness just going
or
through.
or even us and the chairs that we're sitting in right now.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, this is all part of God's creation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, this we are absolutely all one. Everything, you know, and you know that includes what's on the other side too. You know, it just, we have our blinders on that we're just seeing this reality. Well, obviously we can barely figure out this reality, but when you get onto the other side, there's a whole nother spectrum of beings that exist. You know, call them gods, call them spirits. It really doesn't matter how you define them, but there are other consciousness on the other side in this whole other world that has information that would help us in this path. But people aren't really talking about the high dose, and unfortunately, a lot of times people do talk about it. It's oh, you should never do that because I had a bad experience, and you know that gets into, you got to be able to be ready for these experiences. You got to really understand what's going to happen to you, and if you go into it understanding what's going to happen and knowing that you aren't going to die. Because again, the lethal dose, the LD50, is somewhere around 4 pounds. So you, and in the high dose work that I'm doing, I'm also sitting for somebody who's doing some really high doses. Yeah. His last dose was 111 grams.
Wow. Oh my God. Is that the record? That has to be the record, right?
He's going up more. I think his next one is going to be in the 150 range.
Wow. I want to talk to this guy.
Yeah, well, he doesn't really want to talk to anybody. You know, this is part of his own personal journey. But
I understand.
Maybe eventually, when he gets through the other side, he'll talk to people. But he's on this path of trying to clear out his trauma that he was brought up with, and what he's been led to is doing these really high, really high doses in my presence. So I get to understand and watch and help and talk about it. But you know, once he got to the 100-gram point, he's now doing it in split doses. So he goes in with his last one that he did. He took about 2/3 of the tea for the first dose. About 7 hours later, after he came back, then drank the last third of the tea and went back for another 7 hours.
Do you guys vomit when you take this much?
I rarely vomit, and if I do, it'll be just like almost like a hairball. He purges quite a bit at these really high doses. It's if you go to my Instagram, you can see pictures that I set up of the room that I have him doing it in, and people said it looks like Dexter. It looks like a kill room. You know, I've got plastic tarps on the walls and everything covered just for when it happens. But you know, it purging is part of his process, and he's got a lot to purge.
Yeah. Have you ever tried ayahuasca?
I haven't myself. He has. He was actually through ayahuasca, bufo, and one other that I can't remember. He was led to my church and to doing the mushrooms. He was actually communicated with that this was going to be something that he needed to learn and he needed to do the final work that he needed to do. Ayahuasca wasn't enough. Bufo wasn't enough. They were all just steps to getting him to me. My personal path has really just been cannabis, and then a little over a year ago, trying mushrooms for the first time. So I really kind of came from a complete non-psychonaut. I still don't really connect with the term psychonaut, even though people who are doing this work look at me and go, "What are you talking about, man? You're like the astronaut who's gone past all of us."
Yeah,
but for me, it's really trying to understand where religion came from. You know, so if anything, I look at myself as a little more of a explorer of religion. than really a psychedelic user, even though I'm obviously using large amounts of psychedelics.
I think that's an important distinction too, because there's people that use these substances, and I've talked to plenty of people that use mushrooms, and some of them just like, oh, you know, I like the colors and just I got this body high. And I'm like, yeah, but like, how did you like, you know, did you get any revelations from it? Like maybe they didn't take enough. I don't know. But did you like did you get something from the experience? And it's that religious experience that I cherish so much from these things, and or you know, cherish from other people doing them and hearing stories from people like you and saying that it's, you know, everything's going to be okay and there is another side and there's a lot more going on. Like that's the important aspect of what these things hold. It's showing us that like there's way more than meets the eye.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that just gets into all the different ways that mushrooms can be used. You know, I mean, they can be really nice at a concert. You know, I New Year's last year was at a I can't remember the artist, but I was at a little concert and I'd taken about a gram of mushrooms, and yeah, I swear the guitarist was floating towards me over the crowd, right? I mean, and it definitely added to the enjoyment of the experience, and that I wouldn't really call religious, but you know, as an alternative, what most people were doing in the club were drinking a bunch of alcohol, right? So if you know, the two don't really mix well together, and if you're on a little bit amount of mushrooms, you're going to have an experience that is going to make you not really want to drink alcohol. So there's a huge different, and the microdose, you know, the microdose is an effect so little that you don't even perceive it, but it's affecting your emotions.
Yeah.
So there's all these different ways they can be used, but really focusing on the spiritual side of things. And you know, I mean, to me, really, it starts at 15 grams, but that's in the work that I'm doing. You know, Maria Sabina would do much less than that. And, you know, in her practice, she would take the mushrooms, she would be the one taking the mushrooms, and then she would work on somebody else. So there's definitely a bunch of different ways these can be used. And then in the Johns Hopkins studies, you know, their high dose was 3 grams. So they were dealing with between 2 and 3 grams to get that end of life release from people, really guided journey. So there's definitely a lot of different uses and how these can be used, but the really understanding the high dose work and people really experiencing what's on the other side is, of all the things that are happening, it's the thing that's talked of the least, and in my opinion, one of the most important.
Yeah, I always think that too. I'm like, why are more people not talking about this? I mean, it is like within the last few years, it is definitely spreading so much more, but like, I don't know. I feel like it should be like everybody should be talking about this, because it's one of the most, it's, you know, it's the reason why we have our beliefs of God in these churches and every single belief system pretty much. And it's the reason why we're here speaking to each other, quite possibly. And we have all this technology and why we evolved so far. And it's just something, I don't see any detriment to it. That's the thing. Like, there's no detriment to having these things. Like, you know, no one's going to die. It's only going to help people. Like, I can see if they use it in the correct manner, it's only going to better the world. It really is. And I don't know. It's just, we're just living in the remnants of the drug war.
Well, yeah, I mean, there are some reasons why the psychedelic communities don't really talk about the high dose and kind of push people away from it. It all comes down to fear. And you know, the thing is, like, you know, I know somebody who did somewhere around 8 to 10 grams of mushrooms, ended up locking himself in a closet and having a horrible experience. still came out of it supporting mushrooms and actually pushing forward things that have happened here in Oakland and other things that are being doing. But they can be really terrifying experiences. And the problem is that these can actually happen on lower amounts. It really all depends on who the person is that takes them. And I did a lot of research for the talk that I did with Kalindi in the safety aspects of these. And there are some safety concerns. I did find 2 deaths, only 2 that I could find, whereas people consuming mushrooms, but from the mushrooms themselves. One of them was a 24-year-old heart transplant patient.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really important that I didn't know until I found that is if you've had a heart transplant, you shouldn't be doing mushrooms. There's some sort of weird reaction where the psilocybin doesn't play well with the nerves in your heart. And if you've had a heart transplant, you're at a very high risk for death just from consuming the mushrooms.
Wow.
The other one was somebody that, from the amount of psilocybin in his blood, somehow consumed around 4 pounds of mushrooms.
What?
I don't know how.
So he was the first overdose?
Yeah, but the only one that I could find in the entire world that had actually overdosed. My guess, it would have to be by some sort of concentrate. But we don't really know. He died. All that we know is this one report that talked about the amount of psilocybin in his blood.
What a way to go.
Somebody had to do it, so we know not to do it. Don't consume 4 pounds of mushrooms or the equivalent.
That's crazy.
But the other deaths, so those were the only 2 deaths from consuming mushrooms. The other ones are like people jumping out of windows or jumping off of bridges. To me, those are experiences that people just don't know what they're about to experience. If you see the predator come into your apartment, jumping out the window might be the logical thing to do. Now, if you understand that's in your head and jumping out of the window is not going to do you any good. And what I tell people is if they see something terrifying, the thing to do is go up to it and talk to it and ask it, why am I seeing you? What are you here for? Really try to learn what they're seeing that from. But, if you're, one of the big things that happened in Amsterdam was a woman that jumped off a bridge near an art museum. And that was one of the big things that was used in the media and in the government to change the laws in Amsterdam. And again, like if this woman took 3 grams of mushrooms and then saw some sort of terrifying demon appear, running away and jumping off a bridge to get away from it can be a very logical thing to do. It's not the right thing to do, but you can understand, like, if you're seeing something crazy, like running away from it, the fight or flight, it's really, really unfortunate. But that's what gets into the laws and education and really how these things should be legally moved out. Because one of the things that's a problem in Amsterdam and also a problem here in Oakland is there isn't really any laws saying you're allowed to do this, that these things are permitted for you to sell them or for you to have testing labs on them, for you to really have clinics where you could understand what's going on. And that can lead to some bad things. In the case of Amsterdam, that's led to a couple deaths that have been used to push the laws against mushrooms multiple times. At first it was you could get dried mushrooms or fresh mushrooms, and then it was you could only get fresh mushrooms, and now it's you can only get truffles, and even the truffle shops are having problems. So, there needs to be laws that change the legal status and the criminal penalties around these things so that we can start to really understand this and move forward. Which is why I really like what they're doing up in Oregon with Measure 109. So Measure 109, which you know, unfortunately, the Decrim Nature people are against, and really they're against it for not very honest reasons. But what that would do is allow full legalization for people doing clinics, producing them for the clinics, and for the people who are participating in the clinics. So you would actually have an environment where you could get tested mushrooms and know how much psilocybin they're in, and have these areas set up where people can have these high dose experiences in a safe environment with people who knew what was going to happen. So to me, you know, having a law that actually removes criminal penalties and allows people to do these things in a safe environment is extremely important. And the first place in the United States that could happen is Oregon with Measure 109.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting when they said in the podcast that they don't, it's not that they're against clinical use of psilocybin, they're more for just the decriminalization. But then when you bring up that they're actually not even decriminalizing these things, then it's just like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and part of it is they don't really understand what they're doing. And I really don't want to put that message out there, but that's the obvious truth. You know, the lowest priority is a great first step forward, but it doesn't change criminal penalties. It doesn't actually give anybody any rights that they don't have. It's just basically a political statement to say, hey, we think you guys should deal with other things before going after these. And what we really need is to remove the criminal penalties. But now the problem with that is, if you were to just remove criminal penalties completely, you could start selling these things in 7-Elevens. And if that was happening without any sort of context, just right now, there's a large potential for a lot of problems. We know so little about these things. Personally, I would love to know how much psilocybin I'm consuming in my 15 to 20 gram tea, right? I have no way to know how much psilocybin, what other chemicals are in there, what I'm actually consuming. I know this is what I have to do as part of my spiritual path, but as far as, you know, the different types of mushrooms, the different components of these mushrooms, the different reactions that people will have, we know very little about this stuff. So the people who wrote 109 put a lot of thought into that, and they said, okay, well, we want to move this stuff forward, but opening Pandora's box just to say everybody can use mushrooms however they want, that could lead to some potentially dangerous situations and possibly even push us back like they've seen in Amsterdam. So what they were thinking is, well, we'll roll out a therapeutic and clinical model that will allow people to get tested mushrooms, get qualities figured out, controlled, different types studied in a really sort of controlled way. And then after we know more about how people are going to react to these, the different components, and have a whole supply chain that's able to produce these things safely, then let's do full legalization and start having shops that actually sell these for recreational purposes. To me, it's a really smart approach given where we are right now. And they, you know, the other thing that's really kind of dishonest about what Decrim is putting out there is, when you read the laws for how to open one of these clinics, all you need is a high school education. And the fine, or the fees that they're setting are set to be as low as they possibly can, and only allowed to charge what they need for implementation. So you're not talking about clinics having licenses that are, you know, $200,000 or $1 million for a license. You're talking about something that once they get everything figured out, this could be a couple $1,000s to open a licensed clinic to be working with these things. So it's actually a really, really good law that allows anybody to participate in one of these clinics and not really have any problems with the law. So when I read 109, which I to be honest, I only read 109 after Decrim Nature had started saying, hey, we don't support this. So I decided I would read it to understand what there wasn't to support it about. And what I read was incredibly impressive. It was really well thought out, virtually no barrier to entry. And it would create a legalized system where people could understand the qualities of the mushrooms they're consuming and start building the data that we need to really move this forward to full legalization.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, because the biggest hurdle to legalization, like you stated, was it's going to be people that just can't handle these substances, and idiots are just going to ruin it essentially, or just people that they just can't handle it, like I said. And yeah, and then it's gonna, all it takes is one person to jump out of a window, and then the laws go back. So I agree with you on that point, man. We just need to know what these are, because there's so much we really don't know what psilocybin is. Like, we don't know what's in this mushroom, because there's other components of the mushroom, right? Like the beta carboline, what are they called? Beta carbolines?
Yeah, I believe so. There's also I want to say tryptamines. There's a few other components that people say are affecting the trips that we're experiencing. But even in Amsterdam, they don't have testing labs. So when you go to Amsterdam to buy truffles, they'll say, well, this one's a little more visual, this one's a little more philosophic, this one, they have these, but that's really just kind of street experience. It isn't, well, we tested this and it has this level of this, that level of that, and we know that this is the experience that you're going to get out of it. It's really a roll of the dice, and based on, what multiple people have experienced, which is great, but they don't have a clinical environment where people are actually studying these things and trying to figure out what happens when you take 100 grams of mushrooms, right? I mean,
I don't know if anyone can explain that one.
The guy that's doing them can't even explain it. I can tell you what physically is happening to them, but that's where we are. We barely even scratched the surface of this stuff, and we really need to understand it a lot more.
So their rebuttal to that would be, these clinics are only going to make it so that only a select few people are going to be able to get it legally. So then it's going to leave out other people's opportunity to receive treatment by psilocybin.
Which I completely disagree with. These centers, again, there's very little barrier to entry to opening one of these up. And if somebody wanted to have a high dose experience, I've actually been for a while trying to put together a group of high dose sitters that we could let people do the high dose with safe people around them, to help people actually have these experiences. But when you start breaking down the costs, it's not cheap. The way I see it, you'd need at least 2 people, ideally a male and a female. And this is for accountability purposes, for energy purposes, for a lot of different reasons. But so you got 2 people. If you're billing them both at $50 an hour, which is a very low rate, these experiences can easily be 8 to 10 hours. So 10 hours at $50 an hour times 2 people, that's $1,000 right there for sitting. Well, if you put that same situation in a clinic, you have a specialized room, and while these people have to be there for 8 hours, they don't have to be with you for 8 hours. They just have to be available if you're having problems. So if you have a clinic set up where you can have 5 or 6 of these different rooms, 2 or 3 people could still manage 5 or 6 people having these experiences. And you really have an opportunity to drive the cost down. On top of that, personally, you know, if this law passes, it'll take 2 years before the implementation happens. But our church would love to have one of these clinics, and we would be actively looking for people to donate so that other people could have these experiences. You know, I would love to be able to provide a free experience for somebody, but that can literally only be done where there's a legalized system, and you can say, oh, well, donate to this nonprofit, and that will allow 10 people to have these journeys. Right now, there's no legal way you can say, well, I'm allowing people to have these journeys. It just doesn't exist. You're breaking the law by doing it. So, you know, I completely disagree with them and would say, actually, with the way the law is written, it will allow these people to have these journeys in a very safe environment, and potentially even for free, just because people, we need to study these things, you know. So if you have a clinic that's allowed to provide these things and allowed to work with these things, that clinic can definitely get donations from other people to supplement other people having these journeys. So, you know, it's all about the model that's worked out, and what 109 sets up is completely open for doing things like that. So I understand what they're saying, but I really think they're off base, and especially when they're saying, well, but our model allows for people to do that, because Decrim doesn't actually allow to do that. Decrim is not changing any criminal penalties. So if you were to open one of these clinics here in Oakland, one, there's no testing labs, so there's no possibility of saying, well, these mushrooms are this level of psilocybin and they were grown this way. And then you have to worry about the county or the state or even the OPD, you know, the local PD department coming in and having a problem. The reason the local is coming in is if you had a bunch of money there. So if this clinic was actually making money and there was stacks of cash sitting around, then they would be a target for law enforcement going in to take their money. But you know, we really need to get past all this to a point where we can start to really understand these things, and then start to roll out laws that do actually change criminal penalties. So, you know, and then there, you know, again, I don't enjoy having to have these dialogues about what they're doing, because they did a great thing, and they've moved the conversation forward, and anywhere that can pass one of these lowest priority laws, it's a great way to start the ball rolling. You know, it's not the end game. It's not even really anything that protects anybody. But now what the Decrim Nature guys are pushing is this concept of these guided sessions being approved and protected by the government. They really feel like they're going to be able to get some traction with that. But the law that they have says that the local city attorneys will have to defend people in these situations. Well, there is no defense for somebody who is caught with a bunch of mushrooms. There is no defense in the state of California or even the laws of the city of Oakland. So saying that the attorneys are going to somehow step in and be able to protect somebody who's now caught growing mushrooms or working with mushrooms or any of those sort of things, that's not realistic. And I would be amazed if they actually get any traction with that initiative attempt. If they go to the voters with it, that would be one way of getting it on the ballot, but I can't imagine that the city council would actually adopt it like they did the original Decrim Nature laws. And you know, the main reason for that is Decrim Nature, the original lowest priority law, doesn't actually change anything. So it's really easy for a city council member to say, oh yeah, I support that. Oh, you're not actually changing any laws. The city's not going to lose any money. And if anything, they're potentially going to save some money because the cops should be focusing on something else. That's a really easy vote yes.
Yeah.
What's not an easy vote yes is, well, now our city attorneys are going to have to spend a bunch of their time, a bunch of the city's money, trying to defend these people that really have no legal defense.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So where it sounds good in theory, when you actually understand how courts work and how these sort of cases work, and I've been through several of them, it doesn't really make any sense. So when the city, the way these sort of things work is they'll have to find a council member that would present that to the city. Once the council member presents it to the city, then the city attorney reviews it and says, well, this is going to be the implications of what happens if you pass this. And they haven't gotten to that point. But I imagine if they do get to that point, the city attorney is going to say, this is going to cost us a lot of money. We aren't really going to be able to help these people, and I don't support it.
Mm.
We won't know until it actually gets in the hands of the city attorney, but I really can't imagine a city attorney saying anything other than that.
Yeah. Yeah. What is, so putting it simply, it's allowing people to have sitters, but they have to be defended if they get caught. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically. I mean, it's in the context of ceremonies. So it would allow people to have ceremonies that if there were problems, the city attorney would somehow come forward to defend these people. Which, again, I mean, it sounds okay in theory, but if you actually understand how it would work in practice, there's nothing the city attorney could do.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you've now got a criminal case where somebody was caught with a mushroom grow or even an ounce of mushrooms. I mean, there is no legal defense in the state of California for that.
Mm.
So what's the city going to do other than spend money sending an attorney to go down to court a bunch of times until they eventually lose and the person ends up with the criminal penalties that they would have received regardless of whether or not the city attorney was there?
Yeah. Yeah, I can see how that won't fly. It's just a waste of money to people, especially if people don't know how special mushrooms are. Getting back to like what we talked about, they're just going to see the dollar signs and be like, this isn't going to work.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, it's not going to work because those dollar signs don't add up.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, there is in the model that 109 is doing, there's a 15% tax, which you know, is a little bit high, but compared to what we have in California around the cannabis tax is very reasonable. Cannabis here in California is taxed somewhere between 20 to up to almost 40%,
40%,
depending on how you factor it in.
That better be some good weed. That's nuts.
Well, you know, that's another long discussion of why the cannabis legalization that happened in California really didn't work and isn't working and was actually designed not to work. But right now, if you try to go buy an eighth of weed in a dispensary here in California, the good stuff is $70 an eighth plus tax. So
plus tax? Wow.
Plus tax, right? There's taxes below that aren't on the consumer that are why it has to be 70%. But then you're added another 15 to 20% on top of that.
Oh, wow.
So people could be looking at a $90 eighth.
Oh my
and
God.
You know, that's why the industry in California isn't working at all, because people like myself, you know, I smoke a lot of cannabis. At one point I was smoking about 50 grams per day, right?
Oh, that's respect.
Yeah, well, I mean, that again, a whole nother story. But for me, for somebody who even smokes an eighth a day, you know, to go down and spend $90 on an eighth isn't going to happen, especially when their friend down the street is saying, oh, hey, I can give you an ounce for, you know, $200 or less.
Yeah, so the black market's just thriving.
Yeah, Prop 64 was basically Fuel the Black Market Act. And there's a recent article put out, I think LA Times carried it. I don't remember who the source of the data was, but where they're saying 70 to 80% of the California market is the black market now.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, you've got like 3 million black market, or 3 million legal market to 8 million black market. And it really, it's not working. But, you know, that gets into, when things are legalized, they need to be done by people who really understand what they're doing. And where Prop 64 came from in California was, it was actually written by the League of Cities and the Chief of Police Association. They were the ones who came up with the original text, which was to fix the medical marijuana laws in California. And the problem is that everybody who is in the medical industry in California would say, yeah, we need to have things fixed. But what we thought needed to be fixed versus what they thought needed to be fixed were two completely different things. For us, it was, the cops are still harassing us and people are still getting charges and losing their medicine when they're having the cops and cities fuck with them. For the cops in the cities, it was, people are winning in court. So we're still fucking with them, but like 5 out of 10 times people are getting away with things in court. So their problem was that people were getting away with things. Our problem was that they were still fucking with us.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So unfortunately, the people who pushed for 64 took what the state was working on, which was what the League of Cities and the Chief of Police Association designed. And they were like, oh, well, this is great. Let's turn it into legalization. Sounds great in theory, but if you understand where that law came from and why it was designed the way it was, it really makes sense what's happening now in California, which is that there's a really clear line between what's black and what's white, and what's legal is a very small section of what people are doing. So you've got this massive black market, you've got the legal market basically choked out because they can't, there's nobody who smokes a lot of weed in California that will buy weed at a dispensary.
Yeah.
You know, there's just not there. So you're missing a huge part of the market.
Yeah.
And that's again where the big difference with 109 is. 109 is a very well-written law by people who understood the challenges of implementing full legalization with an attempt to move it forward. So when you read it, it's really clear that that's where it came from. Versus here in California, most people weren't able to read 64 because it was so complicated. It was like 130 plus pages. But if you read it, and if you look at what's happening today, it's very clear that this was not designed to work. It was designed to make it so that the cops could put more people in jail, and they would have more opportunities to continue the war on drugs.
Sounds like extortion in a way.
It's a very good description of it.
So what are the next steps for Measure 109?
109, it qualified for the ballot, so people
are voting on it. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I
mean, go vote right now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, 109 would be amazing if it passed in Oregon. And that again gets into another frustration that I have with what's going on, because it is really hard to qualify something for the ballot. You know, in California, I tried to do it in 2014 and 2016 to get the law that I was working on. It is much easier said than done, and it takes a lot of money and it takes a lot of work. And if you've gotten through all those thresholds and you actually get something on the ballot, and if it's something that's designed to move things forward in a really positive way, you got to vote yes on it.
Yeah. What do you think of the chances of it passing?
I think it's pretty good. You know, the opposition for it, there's very little opposition for it. You know, if you go on Ballotpedia and you look at the opponents, there's two psychiatric society groups that are opposed to it, basically saying, you know, we don't believe that anybody should use any sort of psychedelic to treat any sort of mental issues.
Okay.
So those two groups and Decrim Nature Portland. So there's 3 groups that are opposing it. If you go look at 110, which is the other thing that is on the ballot in Oregon, and what 110 is amazing. 110 is true decrim for all drugs.
Wow.
Yeah.
So both of them are on the ballot in Oregon?
Yeah. So you have the psilocybin clinics, and then you have full decrim for all drugs. And basically what 110 says is, look, if somebody's caught with drugs, they need to go to treatment. They don't need to go to jail.
Yeah.
Right. And I would say that, you know, definitely with things like cannabis and mushrooms and most of the psychedelics in general, that you probably don't need treatment in there, but
yeah, no.
Changing the law so that you no longer have a chance of going to jail for drugs is amazing. And again, mind-blowing. And if you go on Ballotpedia and look at the opponents to that, there's a bunch of them. You know, of course the cops don't want that to pass. There's elected officials that don't want that to pass. There's at least 24 politicians or groups that say, we don't want that to pass. We don't want 110 to pass. But they don't mind 109 passing, because 109 is, look, we're not just saying everybody can use drugs. We're saying, okay, we're gonna do this in a very safe, well thought out way to move things forward.
And it just comes down to dollar signs, I think.
Yeah, well, getting something on the ballot is not cheap. In Oregon, it's cheaper than in California, but you know, signature gathering, when you actually get into the details of running these campaigns, you get, the only way to guarantee you're going to end up on a ballot is paid signature gathering.
So how much would it cost?
You know, that rate can vary depending on when you're starting to gather the signatures. The closer it gets to the deadline that everybody has, the cutoff for the election, the more expensive it gets. The highest I've heard is $12 per signature. Now that's a really last minute sort of thing, and given you might need 1 million signatures, that's pretty crazy.
Wait,
right?
So why does it equate to that? Like, what are you actually paying for when you get these signatures? Just like somebody to stand there and ask people to sign something?
Yeah. I mean, that's it. The signature gathering game is incredibly complicated. It's expensive. It's not easy. But yeah, to motivate somebody to stand in front of a store or to stand on a street corner actively gathering signatures is not cheap. Now, $12 is the extreme. So that's right before the cutoff. If you do it early enough, it can be as low as $1, but still you need 1 million signatures. So that's at least $1 million and up to potentially 12 million or more. So
is it really 1 million signatures that you need?
In California, well, so one of the other things you have to account for is duplicates or bad signatures. So I think in California, it might only be like 600,000, between 600,000 and 700,000, which is still a lot, right? But you wouldn't have them gather just that amount, because if you have a single bad signature, then you don't end up on the ballot. So you always have them gather more.
I see.
But it's really not easy, and it's not cheap. So again, when looking at both of those, if both 109 and 110 were to pass in Oregon, it would be a major step forward for drug reform and, you know, the study of mushrooms really worldwide. I don't think there's anything that's that liberal or progressive for both of those things.
Yeah, that would be a huge message for the world.
Yeah.
Like, just, you know, that's so interesting to me that both of those things are on the ballot. Were they the same groups that were doing that, and were they working
Yeah,
together?
there's a lot of co-mixing between the two groups. You know, that's where this thing with Decrim Nature not supporting either of those happened, was the Decrim Nature, and there's some articles you can find about this where there was a falling out between them and the Bronners organization, you know, Bronner soap.
Yep.
Bronners was financially supporting Decrim Nature, and then because of a really a pretty ridiculous situation having to do with peyote, and Carlos's refusal to apologize for what was going on, Bronners pulled their support from Decrim Nature national. They're still helping some of the Decrim Nature groups in other local municipalities, but they're no longer supporting the national group. And after that happened is when Decrim Nature started coming out against 109 and 110. And really, you know, again, the whole situation, there's a few articles out there about it, but it all breaks down to peyote. And there's some groups that are really concerned about peyote because it's an endangered species that takes 5 to 10 years to grow.
Yeah.
So these groups were basically frustrated with Decrim Nature for including peyote in their language, not because they didn't want peyote to be a part of it, but because every time you say peyote, you're now leading people to go take this endangered species and reduce its existence even more. And when there's great alternatives, San Pedro has as much, if not more, mescaline in it, and you can buy the plants at Home Depot.
I didn't know that.
Right? So why not just say San Pedro instead of peyote? And you know, that led into this really ridiculous falling out between the groups. And you know, Bronner's point was, look, just say you're sorry. I mean, that's the easiest thing you can do. Say you're sorry, get rid of anywhere you talk about peyote. Take the Decrim Nature logo actually has a peyote button in the middle of it. Redo your logo. If I was the head of Decrim Nature, that's the second that was brought to my attention, I would do everything I could to remove the peyote dialogue from it. Yeah. And not to say that we don't support peyote, but just start talking about San Pedro.
Yeah, you know, why can't you just say mescaline, like the actual chemical component?
Or mescaline, cactuses that contain mescaline, because there's more than just San Pedro and peyote, right? So that was what led to all of this. And really, from my perspective, now you've got the Decrim Nature guys like trying to throw a wrench in the gears because their egos were hurt over all of this. And you know, it's really, really, really unfortunate. But you know, what we need is to move everything forward. And the work of getting city councils to pass lowest priority laws is incredibly important, and it does really great things as far as moving the dialogue forward, right? But we need to move the dialogue forward, and we need to actually change the laws.
Yeah. I think the lowest priority, from what you've explained to me, is just simply a conversation starter. It seems like that's the biggest thing that people get from it. It's just like, it gets the idea of possibly decriminalizing this or legalizing this in the future, and really doesn't change anything on paper.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you a nice warm feeling, and it allows people to be a little bit more open about these things than they otherwise would have been.
Yeah.
And you know, in the example of showing a police officer mushrooms, right? In a lowest priority city, if you have 1/8 of mushrooms and you show that to a cop, he is not going to waste his time. You know, there's why? I mean, it's 1/8 of mushrooms. That's obviously you're going to use it for yourself. The amount of paperwork that I'm going to have to do for that, it's not worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, 1 ounce of mushrooms or 1 pound of mushrooms, well, that's a bigger problem, right? So again, it all comes down to the discretion of the officer. And there might be some people on the police force who see you walking around with 1 pound of mushrooms and they're just like, I don't have to deal with it, so I'm not going to deal with it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's still plenty of people on the police force who would consider that to be a priority. So if they see you walking around with 1 pound of mushrooms in the open, walking right past them or even bold enough to show it to them, then your priority changes.
Yeah.
And really the problem is if you get pulled over.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you get pulled over, if you get pulled over on the freeway, then in California, that's the California Highway Patrol. They don't care if your city passed a law,
Yeah.
right? It's mushrooms. It's a Schedule I substance. If you get pulled over in the city of Oakland, then again, it's a discretion of the cop. And some cops might be like, well, here's your speeding ticket. I don't really care. But then you could get another cop who's like, oh, well, here's your speeding ticket and step out of the car.
Yeah. Yep.
You know,
it's all in the mood of the officer that day. And that goes along with the lowest priority thing too. It's like, if, you know, is he having a good day or a bad day?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And what's his individual belief on drugs?
Yeah.
You know, because again, if it's an officer who had experienced mushrooms before and had a positive experience, you know, they're probably more than willing to just look the other way.
Yeah.
If it's an officer who's really bred with the war of drugs mentality and sees that as the same as a bag of cocaine,
Mm-hmm.
You got a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it's insanity, man. We live in an insane system of control.
Yeah.
We have a lot of work to do.
We do. I mean, the good thing is things are moving forward. You know, the dialogue has definitely started. The more cities that we can get to pass lowest priority, the better. And the more states that we can actually get to change their drug laws is where we need to go.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Oregon is a great potential model because, again, if both of those things pass, you'll have decriminalization for all drugs. There will no longer be criminal penalties for all drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And you will have a legalized system where people can start really understanding the mushrooms in a controlled environment and building structures around these things where people can have these experiences.
Only time will tell.
Yep.
Yeah, that would be amazing if that does pass, which is only in a few weeks, right? 2-3 weeks. Yeah. Wow, that could change the world. Because it will change a lot of people's opinion, even the people that aren't in Oregon. You know, just people are gonna be like, if they're doing it, why not us?
Yeah. Well, and most importantly, as they start doing it and as they start seeing positive things come out of it, you know, the amount of people in jail for drug crimes in Oregon, gone, right? I mean, just that poof. And then all the data that could come out of these clinics, you know, of like, well, you take this amount and you have this right setting set up and you're healed from what you need to be healed from. You know, that sort of actual data, because other than John Hopkins, we do have the John Hopkins study that shows the end of life, but that's again just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
It doesn't get into any of the work that I've been doing, and doesn't get into, you know, a lot of the other uses of mushrooms. So.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I do see a brighter future. There is light at the end of the tunnel. It's just a long way to go, man. It really is.
Yeah. We'll get there. it's the right path. And again, the dialogue started. The ball is moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
And if we if we manage to win our court case, which could be 4 to 7 years from now,
Wow.
again, court takes time. These things aren't easy. But if we actually were to win our court cases, you've got something that could change the entire nation almost overnight.
Yeah. Very
so
true.
there's a lot of different approaches that are happening simultaneously, but if you look at this from a 20,000 foot view, everything's moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think so, man. I really do. I am optimistic about it, even though you hear like stories of what happened to you, and it's unfortunate. I actually remember reading the headline of what happened, so it's crazy that I'm even speaking to you right now, because I can think back to reading that. I was like, oh man, that sucks so bad. I'm like, that's so horrible.
I mean, it sucks, but the cops didn't understand the pile of shit that they were stepping in. Like, we're one of those ones that just gets all over your boots, and you're not going to get rid of us. And we reopened shortly after all of that, and continue to move forward. But it's what could come out of that could be a very important case. If we actually win at a federal level, that changes the landscape significantly.
I think you will. I think you will, because you're doing, well, even if you do, you don't, but I think you will. You're doing the right thing at the end of the day. At the end of your life, you just know that you're doing the right thing. There's right and wrong, I believe, and you're following the path of what these mushrooms are telling you to go. And either whatever happens to you or your church, like, just know that these aren't fruitless actions. Like these, it's not like you're selling meth or crack or Xanax or something. Like you're providing knowledge to people and yourself about what these amazing substances are, and it's the right thing, man. It really is. It's gonna work.
That's why I'm doing it. If I didn't think it was the right thing, I would not be on this path.
Mm-hmm.
But it's again, for me, it makes a lot of sense when I look at the context of my life and what's led me to where I am right now, that this would be something that I'd be involved with. But even if we lose, there's still something positive that will come out of that, because I told you about the Myers case. Well, the Myers case, he lost that. And because he lost that, there's a template that we can look at and go, okay, this is what we fit into. Mm-hmm. So even if we somehow manage to lose this case, what comes out of it could be really useful to the next person trying to do it. It's not a step backwards. It's only a step forward.
100%, man. 100% agree. I keep fighting the good fight, man. You are doing the right thing in this world, in this universe, whatever's going on. You want to say God or, other beings or the ultimate reality. Like you're furthering human evolution just in these efforts and going through all this, legal chaos that you're going through. Like, this is what you're supposed to go through. This is, like, I guess you can say almost like your destiny. You were put here to be the guy that had to go through the shit in order to change the world, man.
Yeah, well,
we'll see, right?
We'll see what happens, but I'm not stopping. This is what I have to do.
Yeah, so. That's it. All right, man. I think we can wrap this thing up. Before we do though, I want to get back to what you said. There was one of your trips that in the message that stuck with me. It was something about, like, what would God ask himself? Yeah,
that was that. If you were God, what would you ask yourself?
And what was the answer to that?
Well, so it had a couple different levels. So, if you're God, what would you ask yourself? If you were God, what could you ask yourself? Because again, you are everything, you know everything, you created everything. So what could you possibly ask yourself? The only question you might not know is, what am I? Right. And that's during the experience where I experienced the Big Bang and the creation of space and time and all life itself. And the answer to God's question, what am I, was to create us.
Yeah.
God can't understand what it is without creating everything.
without creating us. So we are just God figuring out itself.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna
Exactly.
sleep on that one tonight, man. That's good.
Yeah.
And then the opposite side of the coin is the devil. Well, what was the one with the Satan?
From the last one, that Satan was the first being to design itself.
I feel like those two correlate in one way. It's almost like you create a false reality. You're gonna get yourself into hell in a way. Like I see it as like if you create. I feel like there's more to that needs to be kind of dissected. But I can see where
There
it's
definitely is. I mean, there were a couple comments people had made on that on my Instagram, and I can't remember them off the top, but a few of them were like that. Is that maybe creating your own reality is the worst thing you can do?
or maybe a
But
reality that doesn't align with God. Like you're a reality where you try to like get happiness out of like material possessions and like greed and all of these sinful things. It's like you're creating this thing that isn't aligned with the way.
yeah,
I don't know. That's just how I interpret it.
I mean, trust me, my head has been spinning around that for a while, trying to figure it out. Because the other thing that's part of that too is, well, if you look at all these religions where people are killing each other over their beliefs, and they're the ones saying that, well, if you don't believe in our God, you got to die. What is good and what is evil, and is Satan necessarily an evil thing? Or why is it that there's these religions who are pushing us away from that being and understanding? Maybe we can all create our own existence on the other side. There are so many different possibilities from that. It's really it's really hard to understand. And I'm sure as I go back and have more experiences, everything's been building a story for me this whole time of what's going on with reality and what's going on with religion. And I'm sure I'll get some more insight relative to what that actually means. But of all the messages that I got, and that was the last trip that I had, shortly after the raid too, is when I had that. That has got to be the most confusing message that I've got. What exactly? Why is that what I was shown? Why is that the message that I got? And how does that apply to this existence? And I wish I really had the answer. And there definitely is something that resonates with me as far as the creating a path that's not aligned with God, and that's the problem. But really, it's hard for me to look at the literal text of any religion that's out there and be able to say, well, this makes sense for this reason, or this makes sense for that reason, because they don't really make sense. For us to talk about love and then talk about killing each other, I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, right. It's all for interpretation. Everybody has their own interpretations on it, and that's where it gets messy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's where actually having the experience yourself can start leading to clarity. Not everybody is going to be drawn to the levels of journeys that I'm doing or the work that I'm doing. But I strongly believe that people can have these experiences. And I actually, one of the things that I will be really excited if 109 passes is to see if I could replicate taking people to that place where I experienced the universe from God's perspective. And what's interesting is I've talked to a good number of people about this, and there's some that have had very, very similar trips. So I really feel like that there is a way using these high dose mushrooms to actually bring people to that experience. you know, the rest of the knowledge that's being pulled and the rest of the messaging, it's important stuff, but not everybody can once a month do a high dose of mushrooms and continue on with their life. But if you could do it a few times and be brought to the point where you actually experience God, the world would be a better place.
100%, man. I couldn't have said it better myself. Dave Hodges, I appreciate you coming on here, man. This was an amazing talk. Do you have anything that you'd like to say before we wrap this thing up?
Well, I should plug our websites just in case people want more information. Zidedoor.com. That's ZIDE door.com. The other one that anybody that can help, we would really appreciate. We have a GoFundMe page, which is gofundme.com/Zide Door. And you know, the case is going to be long. It's going to be really expensive. We're not counting on people donating to help move it forward, but
I'll donate.
The more donations we can get, the more it's going to help.
Cool. I'll link both of those things.
Awesome.
That's but yeah, man. Like I said, I'm eternally grateful for you coming on. I thought this talk was pretty enlightening, at least for me. Hopefully for anybody watching this as well, and hopefully cleared some things up about you know, the weird verbiage in the laws that we have, because it definitely did for me, like I said.
Good. Well, I thought it was a great discussion too. I mean, it felt really good.
Cool, man. Cool. Well, yeah, keep doing your work, keep doing your thing, keep spreading the good word. Yeah, you're one of the, you know, you're one of the chosen ones, man. Keep going.
I'm just doing what I gotta do.
That's it. I feel you. All right, man. Well, thanks again, and peace out.
Yep. Have a good one.